Hello everyone, welcome back to another card combo show with me, Chocobilly, and this week we are looking at Helena Leonis, a 3CP7K wind forward with the text, pay a crystal, reveal the top two cards of your deck, remove one card among them from the game, and put the other to the bottom of your deck. You can cast it at any time you could normally cast it this turn. The cost required to cast it is reduced by 2. You can only use the ability during your turn, and only once per turn. When it says it is referring to the removed card, not the card put at the bottom of your deck. It is kind of badly worded for that reason, because it just says it, and the most recent it was the card put to the bottom, so yeah, kind of bad translation grammar there. But regardless, we know what it does. And it's a fun little card. It's not amazing because I guess a comparison to this would be something like the 3CP Wind Rosa forward, where when you cast 3 you get can't remember what you get. Oh, you get your backups back, and then we cast 5 you get to play something off the top of your deck. Whereas this is, you can do something immediately. If you have the crystal, you play her onto the field, there's no auto to trigger, so nothing to cancel then use her effect, but also you don't really know what's at the top of your deck, so there's a lot more randomness with this card. But that's what I'm all about, you know. There's so many silly things you can do with this, and ultimately it's a green mage, and I love green mage. Well, I love most mages that are just a bit weird, like time mages, green mages, red mages to a certain degree, because they're a bit of a Swiss Army knife type of class. But yeah, I like this effect because there are some silly things you can do with it. So the first card I paired this with was Vossler. So same set as well, but when Vossler enters the field you can search a king, and then when Vossler attacks during this turn, the cost required to cast your next forward is reduced by 2. It cannot become 0. So obviously Vossler attacks, -2, use Helena's effect, reveal 2 cards, hopefully one of them is a forward, remove 1 from the game, and now it can be cast, if it's a forward, reduced by 4, but cannot become 0. If it's anything else, then it's just reduced by 2, but can become 0, which is a bit weird. But yeah, ultimately, you want a forward at the top of your deck, and there are means of putting forwards at the top of your deck. Not so easily in Wind Earth, though. But still, you know, it's a fun deck to run if you're running like a particularly high forward count, and it pairs nicely with something like the 11 cost Mont Leonis as well, whose cost is reduced by 1 for each Earth character you control as well. So let's say you've got, you know, 2, 3 Earth backups and Vossler alone, that's -4, let's say. Then there's -2 from Vossler, -2 from Helena, that's a total of -10, and he's an 11. So, you know, he can't become 0 anyway because of Vossler's effect. So it means that ultimately you'd be paying 1 for him anyway. So, you know, that's not too bad. But yeah, kind of fun. Oh, I just realised I did that math wrong. It's 4 and 4, so 8. So he'd be 3 CP. But even still, 3 CP for I think he's an 8k that plays something of 6 CP from your breakdown onto the field. Ain't too shabby. Anyway, I'm talking about cards I haven't actually put in this. So yeah, I'll move on. Ephemeral Summoner. So I mentioned obviously that one of the downsides to Helena is you don't know what's at the top of your deck, but it's the top 2 cards. So there are some things you can do, like Ephemeral Summoner, where you put a water summon, of course 4 or less on top of your deck. Now again, the good thing about Helena is that when she removes the card, it can be cast for -2, but she doesn't have the stipulation that it cannot become 0. So it means that if it's a 2 CP or 1 CP summon, it can be cast for free, even though you've paid the crystal technically. So using Ephemeral Summoner and obviously Yuna, it means that the summon can now become, if it's a 4 CP summon, it can now become 1. Now, like with Vossler, if you were to cast a 1 CP or 2 CP summon with Yuna on the field, she has the stipulation that it cannot become 0. So it cannot become 0. If you use Helena's effect, you reveal a 1 CP or 2 CP summon, you still have to pay at least 1 for them. But obviously you can put 3 CP and 4 CP summons to the top of the deck using Ephemeral. So it means that ultimately 4 CP ones are the cards where the value really lies, because you get a total of -3 CP through Helena and Yuna. But still, it's a nice way to be able to get those cheap summons, and ultimately, you know, you're not every single time you're going to be able to use Ephemeral to get something to the top of your deck for Yuna's effect. So Leviathan's kind of a silly one because it also works nicely with Helena without Ephemeral Summoner. So you can draw 2 cards and put a card on top of your deck, and then you can use Helena's effect to then actually play whatever card that was. Now, Leviathan obviously works well with Ephemeral because Ephemeral can put Leviathan there, but then Leviathan to put something from your hand on top of the deck with Helena's... Yeah, it's a bit weird, but either way, it kind of works. Mind Flayer. So being able to put Mind Flayer to the top of your deck using Ephemeral, then using Helena's effect, and again, this is all assuming they've got Una on the field as well, to then reveal this card, pay 1 CP for it, which is pretty good considering you get to remove something from your opponent's deck and cast it for free. So anything more than 1 CP was worth it, to be honest. Obviously you have to take into consideration that you use a crystal, and crystals in general are about 2 CP, but most of the time they are generated through additional effects. I don't think many cards are played because they generate crystals outside of some of the backups, or the card who is in this episode later, but I've forgotten his name now, Waltrell. So yeah, unless you're going really, really heavy with your crystals, there are other reasons to be running cards as well. But yeah, Mind Flare for 1 CP potentially to then cast something from your opponent's deck is quite fun. Leviathan. So bear in mind that Helena's effect can only be used on your turn. So whilst the Leviathan can cancel an auto ability, ultimately it has to be an auto ability that would trigger during your turn, and it also has to be an auto ability that triggers during your turn but not in the end phase, because if anything happens at the end of the turn, nobody can interact with or nobody can cast anything at the end of the turn, which means that even if you put this card there, you can't actually use it. So yeah, bear that in mind. But either way, if you go to combat, say, and your opponent's got something like the Dark Soul from FFBE, where they stop you from casting summons or something like that, you know, ultimately you can cast Leviathan to cancel its effect or whatever. You know, there are loads of different auto abilities that actually affect you on your turn as well. If something receives damage and it would deal damage elsewhere, you know, there's so many different effects out there. And then you got this Leviathan, so bounce something back to your opponent's hand. Now, this is kind of funny because if a water forward has entered your field this turn, the cost required to cast Leviathan is reduced by 3. So, you can put Ephemeral on top of your deck and cast it with Helena Leonis, and even if you don't have Una, it would actually still cost 0. And I'm going to take out Helena for a second to actually put in Light. Okay, well, there's meant to be a Light Una there. For some reason, it's not there. Yeah, so basically, instead of Helena, you could actually Ephemeral summon a Leviathan to the top of your deck and have the Light Una, which reveals the top card of your deck. If it is a summon, you can cast it, and obviously you can cast it for free because Leviathan has a stipulation that if a water forward has entered your field this turn, the cost required to cast Leviathan is reduced by 3. So, Ephemeral has entered, Leviathan is -3, Una looks at top card, casts it. So, kind of fun. But yeah, also Helena can cast it as well. Again, if Ephemeral's entered the field, Leviathan will be free, basically. And this is the thing you need to make sure when you're doing or matching up these cost reduction effects, is that if there is any effect that states cannot become 0, that affects the whole thing. So if you have Una on the field, that stops Leviathan from becoming free, which is kind of annoying. But Leviathan being able to only be 1 CP is still pretty good, to be honest, and getting to bounce something and then it not be able to be returned or played back onto the field, the following turn is quite nice. Especially for running something like, I don't know, in Wind. Let's go with the old Opus 3, 4, or 5 Zidane when you play him onto the field. Actually, why am I even saying that? You've got the Fire Wind Zidane, which you play onto the field, look at your opponent's hand, remove something. But yeah, there's funny things you can do with it. Right, moving on to Sid Hayes, as you probably guessed. So, when he enters the field during this turn, the cost required to cast your next card is reduced by 2. And again, it's just 2, cannot become 0. So, Sid Hayes plus Helena Leonis means that the next card you cast, and it's just the next card, is -2. Obviously, Helena means that it has to be the card removed from the top of the deck, but Sid Hayes doesn't care what the card is either, so generally, you're going to be in a position where you want to just be casting things anyway, and most of the cards in your deck will be cards you want to cast, so unless you just kind of hit 2 backups at 5 backups or something like that, which would suck, or, you know, forwards which are already on the field, hitting stuff like Alexander's, Luso's, whatever, that's perfectly fine because, well, actually, I say it's perfectly fine. It kind of sucks because you've got -4 and you play a 1 CP, but, you know, there's still other things out there, which ultimately means that you can play stuff onto the field. A really good example, actually, would be the 4 CP Una, who could reactivate all your backups. If you've used everything, so 3 CP, 4 Sid Hayes, and then maybe there was 2 CP before that for something else, and then you get the -4 with Helena and Sid, you got Una, reactivate everything. You know, there's different various different things you can do with it, but ultimately, -4 CP for one of the next 2 cards that you get to play off of Helena's effect. Gals. So again, the cost required to cast Gals is reduced by 1 for each monster you control. That's it. So if you have a couple of monsters well, let's say you've got 3 monsters on the field, which in Wind Water is very likely to be a Tomos, Evray, and probably a Water Drake. I think that's what it's called. The one that draws upon entry. And, you know, you can play Realm to find these cards pretty quickly. And then Helena, reveal top 2 cards. Oh, look, it's a Gal! And you get to cast them onto the field for free, which ain't too bad. Now, obviously, when he enters the field, choose one 40 opponent controls. If its cost is equal to or less than the numbers of monsters you control, put it at the bottom of his owner's deck. Normally, if you'd be free casting Gal, you probably have 5 monsters, which means that you can get rid of a 5 cost or more. This time, it would only be 3. Maybe even less, depending. But if you're running Gal, you should have lots of monsters. So, you know, I'm trusting that Gal's effect will still trigger. But ultimately, it's a way to play him onto the field a bit cheaper, a bit earlier. Yeah, please make sure to like and subscribe to the videos. It makes a big difference to the channel, and it makes a big difference to me as well. It gives me a good gauge on how much you guys are enjoying this stuff as well, and it means that ultimately I'm able to kind of shape what cards I look at. So let me know what sorts of cards you want me to be looking at as well. Is there a particular element that I've neglected, or are there particular cards from older sets potentially that you'd like me to look at? So yeah, just make sure to let me know, but also like and subscribe. Anyway, Seymour, so another way of hedging your bets with Helena means that you can put a summon on top of your deck. So Seymour's a bit of a weird one though, because obviously if you hit him as an EX burst, you do get to put that summon on top of your deck. However, you won't be able to use Helena's effect to be able to cast it. So Seymour is only going to apply when you play him onto the field. That being said, there are means of putting backups back into your hand and then replaying them. Obviously you don't have Althea anymore, but there are still means out there, so maybe there's a way of doing that. But ultimately, Seymour enters, summon to the top of your deck, and then obviously I mentioned earlier, this is probably actually where the light unit will be, but ultimately, yeah, you get to cast stuff. So, Odin, a fairly obvious one. So if you receive 5 points of damage or more, the cost required to cast Odin is reduced by 3. No stipulation about 0. So, Seymour onto the field, put Odin to the top of your deck, use a crystal with Helena and Leonis, cast Odin for free. Not too bad. Arc! So, obviously, if you've got, say, Helena and, I don't know, Chaos. It doesn't have to be Chaos, it could be Little Leela? Yeah, who is obviously the Limit Break Dark card. -5 with Helena, again a -2. So, you know, 2 CP to be able to break a forward and make your opponent discard 2 cards is not too bad. I know everyone focuses so much on using Chaos to be able to make it so that Arc would be cheap or free, effectively. But still, there are other ways of making him cheap through other cards as well. And again, Helena just makes 2 CP cheaper as well. Asura, because yeah, she's only 1 CP, but getting all your backups back, putting that card to the top of your deck, and then getting all your backups back is really, really nice. Also means that if you've just played the Seymour, that means you weren't at 5 backups potentially, so you get to activate that, hopefully cast more cards as well. And then Yule, so another way of putting stuff to the top of your deck. Now, Yule's a bit of a weird one, because it's obviously pay a ice dial, put Yule into the break zone, search for 1 forward, and put it under the top card of your deck, so it's the second card. Which means that, yes, you'd get it in your next draw, but if you would take 2 points of damage or something like that, then it would kind of suck. However, with obviously Helena Leonis, it means that you get to play that card through her crystal effect, and you know what it's going to be. So, Sarah in a well, I was going to say an FF13 engine, but probably not because you're in Wind, and there's only like 2 Wind 13 cards, and they're Alexander or Hope, so not great. But still, one of the reasons I really like this Sarah actually is when a job Moogle enters your field, choose up to 2 characters, dull them or activate them. So it means that you can still play lots of Moogles in Wind, in Ice, very doable. So I quite like that effect, but ultimately Sarah comes onto the field for free. You then get to search a Mog 13-2, play that with 1 Ice CP, which activates 2 or dulls 2 things. But ultimately, if you activate 2 of your backups, you've then actually in the money because you haven't. Sarah wasn't anything from hand. There was a crystal, which technically was from hand, but not really. So you've got 2 backups back, which is pretty good. Lastwell, because Knights are pretty strong now. So being able to, I say that, pretty strong, but not in Wind. So that is admittedly a bit of a weird one to go for. However, Ice Knights in general are pretty strong on their own. So there could be some other element that you've got in there, like FFB, for example, because Lastwell, Helena, who knows. But yeah, being able to put Lastwell to under the top card of your deck and then cast it for free, dull and free some stuff, then maybe play more Knights onto the field from your hand. You know, if you're looking for that Lastwell to make use of the Agrias and the Charlotte in your hand, top of the deck through Yule, play onto the field through Helena, more knights onto the field, freeze lots of stuff out. Lightning. So, again, a bit strange. The cost required to cast lightning is increased by 1 for each card in your opponent's hand. So let's say your opponent has 3 cards in hand. Lightning would be 4 CP. However, Helena would reduce it by 2. So it was increased by 3, reduced by 2. So it's still 2 CP for lightning. However, you have managed to find lightning and put her at the top of your deck and play her onto the field. If you have other discard, abilities, then, potentially that works for that. What I do like about this is that you could put lightning there, threaten your opponent's hand size, and have it there for their following turn if they're not sure what they're going to do. You can have different means of attacking their hand, potentially. And again, in wind, definitely doable. But it's just, there's a lot of versatility in that. But being able to make it so if she is only just a 2 CP and then use Helena Leonis to then play onto the field for free, that's not too shabby. And obviously if your opponent has 2 cards or less in hand, lightning gains 1000 power and haste. Then at the end of the turn, if each player has no cards in hand, deals your opponent point of damage. So being able to find that card, put it to the top of your deck, play onto the field, make sure no one's got any cards, and then deal that point of damage is very effective. Obviously in wind, you can do that through the Barts, who searches 1 CPs. You've also got, I think it's Stiltskin, who searches 1 CP forwards as well, but Yule is when and as you need it, whereas Stiltskin's obviously only upon the entry. Scholar. So when Scholar enters the field, you may pay 1 ice. When you do so, your opponent randomly discards 1 card. So being able to effectively play this for free, but then paying the additional 1, so 1 CP, I quite like, because making your opponent randomly discard a card is scary. There are a few cards in this game that do that: Krista, Quistis, Scholar. So that might force your opponent's hand into something else. If they've got a card, if they've searched something and they want to keep that card, they might be willing to do something else with that card. Like if it's a summon, for example, they might be willing to cast it earlier than they would have liked to do. It forces your opponent's hand a little bit. But ultimately, Scholar is technically free, but then you have to pay the 1 ice, which with the 1 CP for the Yule and the breaking as well is a bit steep, so bear that in mind. But again, making the opponent randomly discard is nasty. Rufus. So if you have a card named Rude and a card named Reno in your break zone, the cost required to cast Rufus is reduced by 2. Straight up. So reduced by 2. If you've got them in there, Yule, top of the deck, Helena Leonis, onto the field for free, and make your opponent discard a card. Grim. Right, moving away from Yule. I mean, it still applies to these cards as well, but just cards that are more focused on the on this effect, so kind of moving outside of ice. So you may reduce the cost required to cast Golbez by 2. If you do so, when Golbez enters the field, put Golbez into the break zone. And then when he enters the field, select one of the 2 following options, choose 1 forward, break it, straight up just break, which is quite nice, or choose a character other than Light and Dark in your break zone, add it to your hand. Now, even for 4 CP, that's pretty steep, getting something back to hand and replaying. I'm not a fan of that. So choose a forward breaker though, not too bad. Now, when you may reduce the cost, required to cast Golbez by 2, and that's at any point you can cast him. Helena, reduce it, or you put him to, don't have to put him to the top of your deck, but you have him on top of your deck, revealed, reduced by 2 from Helena's effect, reduced by 2 by his own effect, so only 2 CP to break any forward, ain't too bad. Oh yeah, and then Shadow Dragon as well. So when Golbez enters this field, even if he's going to break himself, which is an auto ability, which technically can be cancelled, you can then pay the 1 to play the Shadow Dragon from your break zone onto the field, which then can break something else. So 2 CP for Golbez, 1 CP for Shadow Dragon, hopefully breaking 2 things. Not too bad. Chaos. Mentioned him earlier, so I have to mention him now. The cost required to cast Chaos is reduced by 2 for each element among the characters your opponent controls. Everyone knows that he can be free, so if your opponent's on, 4 elements, so -8, what's an additional -2 from Helena? And then he's only 1 CP, and then you cast your Arc for free anyway. So yeah, fun. Shinryu. So if your opponent controls 3 or more forwards more than you, the cost required to cast Shinryu is reduced by 3. So with Helena, it can become 0. So then search any card and add 9 CP Brave forward, which can use an S to break everything, and search anything you want for free is good. Fat Chocobo. So the cost required to cast Fat Chocobo is reduced by 1 for every 3 wind characters you control. Deal 8,000 damage to all the forwards wind controls. So yeah, let's assume you're just a mono wind. So what, you've got 5 wind backups and a wind forward. That's 6 characters, so reduced by 2. Helena, reduced by a further 2. Full CP to deal 8k to all your opponent's forwards. Not too shabby. Now, obviously, I'm focusing more on cards that just utilize the reduction here, but not so much on how you can hedge your bets and get those cards to the top of your deck. Obviously, with Fat Chocobo, you could use something like Seymour. However, Fat Chocobo wants you to have wind characters, and Seymour is not. So, you know, it doesn't work that nicely with that. But ultimately, there are means of making these cards work. It's just sometimes you have to rely on the fact, or not rely on the fact, but you have to accept the fact that Helena is just going to be a little bit random. But that's part of the fun. Agras, as I mentioned earlier. So, her just coming onto the field is pretty grim if you've got a Lastwell, but when she attacks, gain a crystal. And you can attack with Agrias, gain that crystal, and then immediately use the crystal with Helena before Agrias has even had a chance to have been blocked. Now obviously the card might be a forward, might be a backup, might be a monster, whatever, something you can't cast during your attack phase. However, you don't have to cast it as soon as revealed. You can cast it in your main phase too. So attacking with Agrias, then immediately using that crystal. You don't have to immediately use it, but just making sure that the crystal is there to be used. You know, if you're reliably getting the crystals every turn, maybe it's worth using every turn anyway. Furion, when a forward your opponent controls is put from the field to the break zone, gain a crystal. Again, just another nice means of actually getting crystals. Now, Helena, or in Wind in general, you might struggle a little bit to kill things. Obviously, you've got stuff like Lulu, which makes it nice and easy to kill things, but you need to Lulu into something. Thankfully, in Fire, you've got Brynhildas and... what's it called? Oh, it's Ifrit. So it works quite nicely, but you've got Furion, you've got Helena, you've got now Lulu as well, so that's a lot of forwards, and generally when you're running that many powerful forwards all together, you're in a pretty good position anyway, so, you know. But still, it's a means of generating more crystals, and, you know, you can be using your backups to break stuff as well, potentially, so still able to use crystals to then generate stuff, to generate Helena's effect. And then Warrior of Light, so as I mentioned before, you've got more DFF stuff, and again, this would work nicely with Lulu. She enters the field, she's a DFF forward, gets you a crystal. Helena maybe reveals a summon, you cast a summon, who knows. So yeah, ultimately just more reliable ways of generating crystals, and nothing is more reliable than Waltrell. At the end of your turns, gain a crystal. Simple as that. He's going to die pretty quickly, but, you know, he's 2 CP, so is Norshtalan, so, you know, then he might keep on dying, but you reveal 2 cards of your deck. Norshtalan, bring that back, bring him back, gain a crystal in your turn, so, you know, keeps on refunding itself, hopefully. And that is Helena Leonis. There are so many things you can do with a card like this. Ultimately, she's just a bit too random to really be considered strong, but she does work nicely in a cast deck if you're running enough unique names, and they are all cheap enough, which, again, in Wind can happen, you know. Again, Luso, Asuras, all those sorts of things are really cheap. Lulu, even if it's a 3 CP, it doesn't really matter, so long as you're getting that value of something back to hand as well. But really, you want to be knowing what's on top of your deck, so that's why I like the idea of running this card with something like Ephemeral Summoner, which personally I still think is a decent card. Being able to put a 4 CP water summon to the top of your deck is pretty strong, considering that water has some of the most strong summons in the game. I mean, now that you can put something like, I don't know, Anima to the top of your deck, and then Helena Leonis to reveal it, and then cast it on 1 CP to remove something, and because it's reduced by 2, you don't have to pay the 1 backup, which chances are is what you would do rather than discarding for it, so you get to draw the card for it anyway, so, you know, that's pretty good. I really like Helena Leonis because of these silly effects, but yeah, just a bit too random. But that's not to say it's bad. Anyway, let me know what you guys would like to see more of, because I am genuinely intrigued to see what you guys want to see more of. I tried to steer clear of all the meta-relevant stuff, Axstars and 7 Wall, that sort of thing. But, you know, if that's what you want to see, then maybe I'll focus on those cards, but jankier ways to use them, rather than, you know, what's just being thrown out there in the meta. Although, to be perfectly honest with you, the meta at the moment is pretty janky, because it's 7 Wall with pretty much everything good, which is pretty random. And the fact that Gilgamesh FFB is getting so much play at the moment, whilst it's pretty toxic given the whole meta, I love it so much, because I've always loved that card. I've always thought it was quite funny, the fact you need that many elements, but we are now in a position where you can have that many elements very easy, very quickly. So yeah, who knows? Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next video.